Today we're going to look at the three phases of the wrist on the serve. And before we get started on these three phases, it's important to remember that if you're not using a continental grip or an Eastern backhand grip on your serve, now I would say start with that first. Start with learning the continental grip, which if you don't know is the handshake grip. It's if somebody hands you the racket, it's like shaking their hand, and that's the continental grip. And then if you want to rotate your hand slightly clockwise, if you're a right-hander, from the continental grip and place your base knuckle of your index finger on bevel number 1, that would be the Eastern backhand grip. And either one of those grips are fine for the serve, but for this lesson, I wouldn't recommend trying to do any of this stuff with the pancake grip because you could really hurt yourself and maybe hurt your wrist. So to use the proper grip on this one, this lesson, it's imperative, or you really could get hurt. The other thing with the wrist is the wrist in the phases of the serve, it really is a loose wrist and it's not a tight wrist. So as we go through these demonstrations, just remember the looser and whippier your grip in a controlled manner, the better. I didn't mean grip. I meant how tight you hold the racket and how tight you keep your wrist. Keep it loose and flexible, and you'll have a really, really nice power, spin, control serve. Here's an exaggeration of not using your wrist as I just throw the ball, trying to get the ball over the net. Not very successful. There's just not a lot of power and there's not a lot of whippiness in this. As you can see, the wrist is just straight and there's really no functional assistance on getting this ball over the net without the use of my wrist. There's just a little bit kind of forced from habit at the very end of this throw, but there's no wrist action at all in this throw. Here's an example here of the phases of the wrist. This is the preparation stage. Here you can see the wrist is forward. Then you've got the acceleration phase, which is where the wrist lag happens. And then you've got the wrist transition into your pronation, and you finish the shot at contact. So let's look at it again. You lay the wrist back. This is where the racket drops. And then you snap the wrist forward, and that's where you make contact. And again, that's the preparation and then the snap forward. It's really hard to see this when you're playing because most of this is happening behind you. So I'm just showing you what it looks like, and now I'm going to demonstrate what it looks like to use the wrist snap and throw it over the net. You see how much easier it is and how just pulling the wrist into the shot, into the throw, all of a sudden provides this whippiness to not only the wrist, but to the arm as well. The arm gets real loose and whippy as I pull the wrist into the chain here, the kinetic chain. A baseball player goes through the same three phases with their wrist as we go through as tennis players with our serve on the wrist. So on the picture on the left, you can see the pitcher is winding up and his wrist is in the preparation stage. This would be the stage where we would get it into the trophy pose in this picture. And then the image on the right is where now his wrist lays back and he's into the acceleration phase. And this is where we get our racket head drop. So this is where we get into the acceleration phase. And you can kind of see the similarities between how this pitcher loads up his wrist in both the preparation stage and the acceleration stage. The only difference is a baseball pitcher is throwing straight, and we as tennis players, when we serve, we have to serve up. We have to explode into the ball where they're exploding off the mound towards their target. we are actually exploding up to drive the ball up and then bring it down with our spin. So this is a good example of preparation and acceleration in a baseball pitcher's motions with his wrist. In this picture here, you can see the baseball pitcher finishing with his wrist transition into his pronation and flexion. This is very similar to us making contact with the ball, except see how his arm is coming straight out and our arms are straight up. So his contact point and release is obviously different than we as tennis players, but you get the idea where now his wrist is totally released and it's come forward, and his wrist is snapping down as he completes his pitch. So that's just an example of how a baseball pitcher uses the same 3 sets of wrist motions that we use in our serve. I'm demonstrating the 3 positions of the wrist. There you can see the preparation, the acceleration, and then the wrist transition. Those are the 3 that we're looking at today. And again, it's preparation here, which is your backswing or trophy position. There's your laid back, which is the racket head drop, and then there's your contact point. One more time, trophy pose, laid back, and then contact point. And so those are the 3 positions of the wrist without a racket. It might be easier to see it like this, just to see the wrist only and not focus so much on the racket. Here's an exaggerated look at the same shot that I was showing you where I was just throwing it. Now I have the racket. So you can see I'm in the preparation stage here, which is kind of the trophy pose. Then you can see there's the acceleration, which is the racket head drop, which it's not dropping. I'm just showing you the phases. And then the third phase is the wrist transition, and that's contact. And see how the wrist just kind of naturally wants to lay down after you make contact. So again, right, here's the trophy pose or the preparation phase right here. Then the racket head drop, and there is the acceleration and then the contact. And again, these are very exaggerated just so you can see the wrist. I'm not really going into a big service motion here, but there you can see again trophy pose, acceleration on the racket head drop, and contact right there. So those are the 3 phases of the serve of the wrist. And again, the wrist is just very relaxed. It's stable enough to get you through these positions, but it's loose enough to get you nice and windy. So now let's take a look at the 3 phases during a live serve. You can see here that at the beginning of the serve, the wrist is very relaxed. On the take back, you can see the wrist is just still very relaxed. Now the racket comes up here to the first phase, which is the trophy pose or the preparation phase. Once you're in this phase, your racket is just ready to go. So again, like we saw in the example with the pitcher, your preparation here, you are ready to go and launch yourself up into the next phase. And here's the next phase right here. You can see the racket head start to drop, and we are now fully into the acceleration phase or the wrist lag phase, where that racket just drops. But again, it just drops naturally because your wrist is so relaxed. So now we are in the acceleration phase here, and now we start to make contact, and then we finish right here. After contact, you can see that the wrist is now transitioned into a pronated state, but it's not a state that I force the racket into. It's a state where the racket just merely fell into on its own. And there we see the finish. So if you look at this picture here, here's the preparation phase by a professional that we know. And you can see here, again, he's in a very relaxed state. The racket is not quite up to the trophy pose. It's getting up. It's actually getting up there, but the wrist is cocked. So he's already got the wrist in the preparation stage. and he's going to begin his halo, and then he'll start his acceleration. But this is the preparation phase here. And in this image here, now we see the acceleration phase with the wrist lag. You can see that this player is up off the ground and he's accelerating the racket. And you can see the wrist lag here is at his arm, looks nice and whippy here. And then here's the finish here with the wrist transition. And again, the phase goes into pronation, but the player isn't forcing it. This just happens naturally. So you really don't want to force any positions on your wrist because that's how you'll get hurt. Just let these positions come naturally from having a nice, loose, whippy swing. So again, just to summarize, the 3 phases of the wrist on the serve. 1, preparation and backswing, which is where you take the wrist back into the trophy pose. 2, acceleration and wrist lag, which is where the racket head actually drops and you start to pull the racket up. And then 3, the wrist transition into pronation, which happens after contact, and it just happens naturally. So if you just want to go out and practice, you don't even need a ball. Just take your racket out and practice getting a nice loose whippy swing. Hit all of these 3 phases of the wrist. Even take a tennis ball out and throw it over the net a few times so you get the feel of this. And I hope this lesson helps you on your way to having a great serve. And if any of this helped you, please give me a like and a subscribe, and I will see you on the courts. Thanks again. Bye for now.